Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, incredibly fascinating topic, the vast tapestry of how America fights its deepest conflicts, how it resolves them, and perhaps most importantly, how it ultimately chooses to remember them. Let's dive right in. So how does a nation actually remember its deepest, darkest conflicts? It's really easy to just glance at a timeline and see a bunch of dates and sterile facts. But there is usually a massive gap between the gritty, boots-on-the-ground reality of history as it happened and the highly polished media we consume decades later. What you should really take away from this explainer is exactly how that gap is bridged and, well, sometimes distorted by the ways we choose to remember.
Section 1. Forging a Divided Nation. Just think about the sheer velocity of these early conflicts. In less than a century, the American Revolution kicks things off in 1775. Then, just a few decades later, the War of 1812, which some folks actually call the Second War of Independence. By 1846, the Mexican-American War is dramatically redrawing the map of the continent, and finally, in 1861, the American Civil War hits, and those deep, festering internal divides just completely tear the nation apart. These wars physically forge the nation's borders, sure, but they also firmly set the stage for how the country handles a crisis.
And the tangible cost of these early conflicts? It was absolutely staggering. 66 million. According to historical records, the American Revolution alone cost about $66 million in specie, meaning actual physical gold and silver. To cover a bill like that, Congress had to print massive amounts of paper money. This famously led to such terrible inflation that the phrase, "not worth a continental," literally became a common insult. It's a powerful reminder that, way beyond the heroic stories, these wars were immense logistical and financial burdens that tested the very survival of the young nation.
Section 2. Vietnam's Diplomatic Legacy. Now, jumping forward to the Vietnam era, the strategy was, largely defined by military excess, ideological overreach, and targeted misinformation, with career diplomats frequently pushed to the sidelines. But post-Vietnam diplomacy, it completely shifted gears. Recognizing the severe limits of relying on military force alone, institutions like the Foreign Service Institute began heavily emphasizing crisis negotiations, area expertise, and cultural awareness. Basically, diplomacy became the go-to tool over immediate military escalation. So, what's the ultimate lesson from post-mortem analyses like the infamous Pentagon Papers? It boils down to this. When diplomatic caution gets bulldozed by political urgency, the U.S. absolutely risks repeating its most costly mistakes. Those documents completely dismantled public trust because they exposed the harsh reality of the war, which was completely different from the official narrative. It essentially forced a total reshaping of global intervention strategies for decades to come.
Section 3. Documentaries and Public Memory. Which brings us to a huge question. How do these incredibly complex historical and diplomatic realities actually make their way to us today? The answer is commemoration. This is how a war is formally remembered. Yes, obviously that means physical monuments and battle reenactments, but honestly, in the modern era, nothing translates history into the public consciousness quite like a well-crafted documentary video. Long after the actual battles end, it's the camera lens that really decides how future generations understand the conflict. And we see this influential media everywhere, right? Think about Ken Burns' groundbreaking 1990 documentary video series, The Civil War. It had a massive impact on how Americans visualized that era, brilliantly bringing still photos to life with incredibly engaging narration. We also see the PBS series Liberty doing the exact same thing for the American Revolution. And of course, Hollywood steps into the ring with films ranging from the highly controversial The Birth of a Nation all the way to the acclaimed Lincoln. Now, while these films and documentary videos are amazing learning tools that make history super accessible, their actual historical accuracy is often hotly debated by scholars. They are interpretations, not pure, flawless reflections. Section 4. Imagining future conflicts. So what actually happens when we project all these past mistakes, this whole history of civil divides, and our modern media formats into the future? Well, Omar El-Akkad brilliantly illustrates this in his 2017 speculative novel American War. The premise is chillingly grounded. It's the year 2074, a Sustainable Future Act has banned fossil fuels, and in response, the free southern states decide to secede. The author tells the entire story using fictionalized oral histories, interview transcripts, and media reports. It reads exactly like the script of a future documentary video, using the familiar formats of historical preservation to make a fictional future feel alarmingly, uncomfortably real. And the stakes in this speculative future, they are almost incomprehensible. 110 million. In the novel,
That is the terrifying, staggering fictional statistic representing the casualties caused by a biological weapon known as the reunification plague. Just as we looked at the $66 million of the Revolutionary War to grasp its early scale, this massive number forces the reader to confront the horrific, apocalyptic potential of future wars, especially if the diplomatic lessons of our past are forgotten.
Just consider this absolutely gut-wrenching reflection from the novel. What is safety but the sound of bombs dropping on someone else's home? Wow, real-world readers and even politicians have pointed to that exact line when discussing the grim psychological reality of living through conflict. It completely strips away the sanitized heroic narratives we so often see in retrospect and forces us to look at the raw human cost of war.
Which really brings us to our final big question for today. Is studying our past, poring over historical documents, analyzing those massive shifts in diplomacy post-Vietnam, and watching countless hours of documentary videos, is that actually enough to prevent the fictional futures we're so terrified of? Or are we destined to just keep creating new, tragic history for future documentaries to cover? It's a pretty heavy thought, but an absolutely essential one to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep digging into history, and I'll catch you next time.